Dad, I need $8,000 for emergency medical bills. It's life or death, my daughter Marjorie begged through tears that Memorial Day morning. Like every devoted father, I wired the money immediately, emptying my retirement savings to save my only child's life. That evening, scrolling through Facebook, I saw the photo that shattered my world. Theodore, her father-in-law, flashing a luxury Rolex worth exactly $8,000 with Marjorie's caption, "To the best. Father-in-law, a gift that matches your class." 20 years of college emergencies, wedding expenses, and financial crises suddenly clicked into place like engine parts, finding their proper positions. My daughter hadn't needed medical funding. She'd needed gift funding. And I'd been the unwitting ATM that made it possible. They thought I was just a broken-down mechanic, too old and too heartbroken to fight back. But after 40 years of fixing problems other people couldn't solve, I knew exactly how to dismantle something that was beyond repair. What I did next would teach my daughter the difference between genuine emergencies and manufactured ones, and she would never see it coming. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The morning had started like every Memorial Day for the past 8 years since Dorothy passed. I'd placed fresh flowers on her grave at Mount Hope Cemetery, then returned to our modest colonial on Elmwood Avenue to wait. The neighborhood still carried the scent of barbecue smoke and the distant sound of children playing in backyards decorated with American flags. At 62, I'd grown accustomed to quiet holidays. 20 years, working as an auto mechanic at Riverside Garage, had given me steady hands and a practical mind, but it had also given me arthritis that made each Memorial Day a reminder of my limitations. Still, when Marjorie called 3 days ago, promising a special surprise, something in her voice had stirred hope I thought I'd buried with Dorothy. The doorbell chimed at exactly 2 o'clock. Punctual, as always, my daughter stood on the porch with that designer coat that probably cost more than my monthly pension. Behind her, Bradley shifted nervously in his expensive shoes, clutching a small gift bag like it contained something precious. "Happy Memorial Day, Dad," Marjorie said, her smile bright but somehow hollow. At 34, she'd inherited Dorothy's auburn hair, but none of her warmth. "We brought you something special." The bag felt suspiciously light in my weathered hands. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, lay a pair of navy socks, still bearing the $12.99 price tag from Marshall's C. The kind I'd worn to work every day for decades. Practical, I managed, forcing gratitude into my voice. Just what I needed. Marjorie's laugh had an edge to it. "Exactly. We know you don't like anything fancy. Bradley and I were just saying how you're such a simple man with simple needs." Bradley nodded eagerly. "No point in expensive stuff for someone who appreciates the basics, right, Harold?" Their condescension hung in the air like cigarette smoke. I folded the socks carefully, remembering the college tuition I'd paid by selling my fishing boat, the wedding expenses that had emptied my savings account. $20,000 for her dream wedding while I ate peanut butter sandwiches for 6 months. "You staying for coffee?" I asked, though their body language already gave me the answer. "Actually, we're having dinner with Theodore," Marjorie said, checking her phone. "You know how he loves hosting these family gatherings." They were gone within minutes, leaving only the lingering scent of Marjorie's expensive perfume and the echo of their shared laughter. That evening, scrolling through Facebook to pass the time, I saw the photo that would change everything. Theodore's wrist gleaming with a luxury watch I'd never seen before. Marjorie's caption made my blood run cold. The laptop screen cast a blue glow across the darkened kitchen as I stared at the photo that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my daughter. Theodore's face beamed with satisfaction. His arm extended across the white tablecloth of what looked like Rochester's most expensive steakhouse. But it wasn't his smile that made my hands tremble. It was the gleaming Rolex Submariner wrapped around his weathered wrist, catching the restaurant's chandelier light like a beacon of betrayal. "To the best father-in-law, a gift that matches your class," Marjorie had written beneath the image. 23 likes already, including one from Bradley. The timestamp showed 6:47 p.m., less than 5 hours after they'd left my porch, with their condescending smiles and my pathetic socks. I zoomed in on the watch face, my mechanic's eye automatically assessing the details. Genuine Submariner black dial ceramic bezel, the kind I'd admired in jewelry store windows during lunch breaks at the garage, knowing I'd never afford one on a pensioner's budget. The kind that cost more than my entire Social Security check for 6 months. My chest tightened as fragments of memory began clicking into place like engine parts finding their proper positions. 2 months ago, Marjorie's panicked phone call at 11 p.m. "Dad, I'm so sorry to bother you, but there's been an emergency. Bradley's insurance won't cover it all. I need $8,000 for medical bills. It's critical, Dad. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't life or death. I'd wired the money the next morning without hesitation, emptying my emergency fund, the money Dorothy and I had saved for the retirement we'd never get to share. When Marjorie had called to thank me, her voice had been strange, distant. "You're the best father in the world, Dad. This money is going to make such a difference." She hadn't lied about that last part. The coffee in my mug had gone cold hours ago, but I couldn't taste anything anyway. The bitterness coating my tongue had nothing to do with Maxwell House. I scrolled through the other photos from their dinner, Theodore raising a toast, Marjorie glowing with pride, Bradley looking smug as ever. A celebration. They were celebrating. My arthritis-gnarled fingers hovered over the keyboard. I could comment on the photo, ask Theodore about his beautiful new watch. I could call Marjorie right now, demand an explanation. But part of me already knew what her response would be. More deflection, more condescension, more of that honey-sweet voice explaining how I just didn't understand the complexities of their adult lives. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 11 times, each note echoing through the empty house like Dorothy's disappointed sighs. She'd warned me once during one of Marjorie's college emergencies, Harold, "Sweetheart, you can't buy love, and you can't buy respect either." I'd brushed off her concerns, then convinced that providing for our daughter was simply what good fathers did. Now, staring at $8,000 of my retirement glittering on another man's wrist, I finally understood what Dorothy had seen years before I did. My daughter hadn't needed emergency medical funding. She'd needed emergency gift funding. And I'd been the unwitting ATM that made it possible. The screen's glow began to blur as exhaustion settled into my bones. But beneath the weariness, something harder was taking root. A cold, methodical anger I hadn't felt since Dorothy's doctors had first used the word terminal. Dawn broke gray and overcast across Rochester, matching my mood as I stood at the kitchen window with my third cup of coffee. The sleepless night had crystallized my thoughts into something harder than the arthritis settling into my joints. At 62, I'd learned the difference between problems you accept and problems you solve. This wasn't going to be the accepting kind. The grandfather clock chimed 7 times as I pulled on my work jacket, the same Carhartt I'd worn to the garage for 2 decades. Old habits die hard, and today I needed the confidence that came with familiar armor. I had questions that needed answers, and after 30 years fixing problems other people couldn't solve, I knew where to start. Danny Kowalski was already on his front porch when I stepped outside, coffee mug in hand, and yesterday's Democrat and Chronicle spread across his lap. At 71, the Korean War veteran maintained the same 0600 routine he'd followed since moving to Elmwood Avenue 15 years ago. His German Shepherd Rex lifted his graying head as I approached. "Morning, Harold," Danny called out, his voice carrying that familiar rasp from too many cigarettes in his army days. "You're up early for a holiday recovery day." "Couldn't sleep," I replied, crossing the narrow strip of lawn between our properties. "Mind if I join you for a minute?" Danny folded his paper and gestured to the empty chair beside him. "Coffee's fresh if you want some." Eleanor made a full pot before she left for her sister's act. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, 2 old men watching the neighborhood wake up. Danny had been the kind of neighbor Dorothy always appreciated, helpful without being intrusive, reliable in the way that mattered. When she'd gotten sick, he'd mowed our lawn without being asked and never mentioned it. "How was your Memorial Day?" I asked, testing the waters. "Quiet." Eleanor made her famous potato salad for the Hendersons' barbecue. "Saw your Marjorie and that husband of hers heading out yesterday afternoon. They clean up nice for fancy dinners." Something in his tone made me look up from my coffee. "Fancy dinners," Danny chuckled, scratching Rex behind the ears. "Saw them coming out of that jewelry place downtown last month. You know, the expensive one on South Avenue, Fletcher's Fine Jewelry. Marjorie was carrying one of those little fancy bags, and Bradley looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Figured they were shopping for anniversary presents or something." The coffee turned bitter in my mouth. "Fletcher's, you said?" "Yeah, the place that advertises those Rolex watches in the Democrat. Eleanor always jokes about wanting one for Christmas, but I tell her my Timex keeps time just fine." He shook his head with amusement. "Kids these days, though, everything's got to be top shelf." I forced my expression to remain neutral while my mind raced. Fletcher's Fine Jewelry, not a medical office, not a hospital billing department. A jewelry store that specialized in luxury watches, visited by my daughter a month before her medical emergency. "Harold, you all right there, buddy?" I realized I'd been staring at nothing for several seconds. "Yeah, just thinking about something I need to take care of today." Danny nodded knowingly. Retirement'll do that to you. Gives you too much time to think. But hey, if you need a project, my garbage disposal's been making noises like a dying cat. Eleanor's threatening to call a plumber. I'll take a look at it this week, I promise, standing up. Thanks for the coffee conversation, Danny. As I walked back to my house, Danny's casual words echoed in my head. Fletcher's fine jewelry. The pieces of Marjorie's deception were falling into place with the precision of a well-oiled engine. And, like any good mechanic, I knew that once you identified the problem, the fix became a matter of having the right tools and the determination to use them. Fletcher's fine jewelry occupied a corner building on South Avenue that screamed money from its polished granite facade to the discreet security cameras positioned like watchful eagles above the entrance. I stood across the street for a full minute, adjusting my collar, and wishing I'd worn something better than my Tuesday khakis and polo shirt. The display windows showcased watches that cost more than my annual pension, their faces gleaming like tiny suns under perfectly positioned lighting. The bell above the door chimed with crystalline precision as I entered, and immediately I felt like a mechanic who'd wandered into a museum. Everything gleamed: marble floors that reflected the overhead chandeliers, glass cases that sparkled without a fingerprint in sight, and air that smelled faintly of expensive leather and privilege. Even the silence felt expensive. "Good morning, sir. Welcome to Fletcher's 2000. The woman who approached me wore a tailored black suit that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. Her smile was professional, but her eyes quickly assessed my working man's appearance. "I'm Jennifer. How may I assist you today?" I pulled the printout of Theodore's Facebook photo from my jacket pocket, the paper feeling rough and ordinary in this palace of refinement. "I'm hoping you can help me with some information about a purchase. This watch was it bought here?" Jennifer's eyes flicked to the image, and something subtle changed in her expression. Recognition, maybe concern. "May I ask why you're inquiring about this particular piece?" "It's a family matter," I said, keeping my voice steady despite feeling like every camera in the store was recording my inadequacy. "I need to verify when and how it was purchased." She studied the photo more carefully, then glanced toward the back of the store, where an older man in an impeccable suit was arranging something in a display case. "Let me speak with Mr. Fletcher, our manager. Would you mind waiting just a moment?" I nodded and tried to look like I belonged among the Rolexes and diamonds, while she walked away with my printout. The conversation at the back counter was conducted in hushed tones, but I caught the manager's head turning in my direction twice. After 30 years of reading body language in garage waiting rooms, I knew when people were discussing whether they should trust someone. "Mr. Fletcher approached me with the careful steps of a man accustomed to handling delicate negotiations. "Sir, I'm Richard Fletcher, the store manager. Jennifer mentioned you have questions about one of our pieces." "That's right," I said, meeting his gaze directly. "This Rolex Submariner. I have reason to believe it was purchased here within the last 2 months, and I need to confirm the details of that transaction." Fletcher's eyebrows rose slightly. "I'm afraid I can't simply provide transaction details without proper authorization. Are you law enforcement insurance? Do you have documentation showing your relationship to this purchase?" I reached into my back pocket and pulled out my wallet, extracting the credit card statement I'd printed that morning. The $8,000 charge from Fletcher's fine jewelry was circled in red ink. "This is my credit card. That's my money that bought that watch. I'm not law enforcement. I'm just a father trying to understand how my daughter spent $8,000 of my retirement savings." The change in Fletcher's demeanor was immediate and profound. His professional caution melted into something approaching sympathy, and he gestured toward a private consultation area near the back of the store. "Mr. Mitchell. Harold Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell, I think we need to have a conversation. Would you mind stepping into my office?" Fletcher's office reflected 40 years of dignified business mahogany desk, inherited from his father family photos showing 3 generations of jewelers and certificates from the American gem society framed with quiet pride. He gestured to a leather chair across from his desk, while his assistant Jennifer discreetly closed the door behind us. "Mr. Mitchell, I want you to know that in 38 years of business, I've never had a situation quite like this." Fletcher began settling into his chair, with the careful movements of a man who'd spent decades handling delicate negotiations. "Before we discuss details, may I ask, are you considering legal action against your daughter?" "I honestly don't know yet," I replied, surprised by my own honesty. "Right now, I just need to understand what happened. I need to know if what I suspect is true." Fletcher nodded with the understanding of someone who'd witnessed countless family dramas play out over jewelry purchases. He turned to his computer screen and typed quickly. The transaction you're asking about occurred on March 15th. A Rolex Submariner Model 116610LN purchased for $8,200, including tax. The precision of the details hit me like cold water. March 15th was exactly 2 days after Marjorie's frantic phone call about medical emergencies. Who made the purchase? A young woman approximately 30 to 35 years old, accompanied by a man of similar age. She paid with a credit card. Fletcher paused, studying something on his screen. The card name was Harold Mitchell. There it was. Confirmation in clean professional language that stripped away any possibility of misunderstanding or coincidence. My daughter had used my credit card to buy an $8,000 watch for her father-in-law while telling me the money was for life-saving medical treatment. She seemed very particular about the selection, Fletcher continued quietly. Asked specifically about this model, mentioned it was for someone who appreciated quality timepieces. She appeared quite knowledgeable about luxury watches, more so than many customers who purchase gifts. Did she seem upset, nervous, I asked, trying to understand Marjorie's state of mind during the transaction. Quite the opposite. She seemed pleased, almost excited. She mentioned it was a special gift for someone who'd been very supportive of their family. Fletcher's expression remained carefully neutral, but I caught the slight tightening around his eyes. Mr. Mitchell, I've been in this business long enough to recognize when someone is buying a gift with their own money versus when they're spending someone else's. Your daughter had the confidence of someone making a purchase she'd planned and saved for. The office fell quiet except for the distant hum of traffic on South Avenue. I stared at my hands, calloused from decades of mechanical work age spots beginning to show despite my daily applications of Dorothy's old hand cream. These hands had built engines, fixed transmissions, and written countless checks for Marjorie's dreams. They'd never written a check for an $8,000 watch. Mr. Mitchell, I don't typically offer personal advice, Fletcher said gently, but I've seen enough family situations to know that sometimes the hardest conversations are the most necessary ones. Whatever you decide to do with this information, you deserve to know the truth. I looked up at him, this dignified man who could have simply refused my questions, protected his customers' privacy, and sent me away empty-handed. Instead, he'd chosen compassion over policy, understanding that some betrayals cut deeper than others. Thank you, I said, standing to leave. I appreciate your honesty more than you know. As I walked back through the showroom toward the exit, past the gleaming displays of watches and rings that represented love and celebration and special occasions, I realized that everything I thought I knew about my relationship with my daughter had been as fragile as the crystal protecting those expensive timepieces. The Ford pickup's engine hummed steadily as I navigated Rochester's afternoon traffic, but my mind was assembling the pieces of a 20-year puzzle with the methodical precision I'd once used to diagnose transmission. Problems. Fletcher's confirmation had been the missing gear that made everything else click into place, and now I could see the full scope of Marjorie's long-term strategy. College tuition, Dad. Syracuse is my dream school, but it's so expensive. I promise I'll make you proud. $42,000 a year while I ate peanut butter sandwiches and sold the fishing boat Dorothy and I had planned to take to Sganiatila's lake. Wedding expenses. Daddy, I know it seems like a lot, but this is once in a lifetime. Theodore's family is covering the rehearsal dinner. $28,000 for a reception that lasted 4 hours while I worked overtime at the garage for 6 months to pay for it. Student loan emergency. Dad, the interest is killing me. If you could just help with $15,000, I could get ahead of this. Money that had come from my pension fund, the nest egg Dorothy and I had built through decades of careful saving. And now the medical crisis. It's life or death, Dad. $8,000 for procedures insurance won't cover. Procedures that turned out to be a luxury watch for her father-in-law purchased while she carried herself with the confidence of someone spending her own carefully saved money. Each memory carried the same elements: Marjorie's tears, her promises of necessity, my immediate capitulation, and her relief that bordered on satisfaction. I'd been so focused on being the good father, the provider, the safety net, the one who never said no, that I'd missed the obvious pattern. I wasn't raising a daughter. I was training a professional manipulator. At a red light near the Genesee River, I realized Dorothy had tried to warn me during Marjorie's sophomore year. We'd been sitting on our back porch after another tuition conversation, and Dorothy had said quietly, "Harold, honey, every time we say yes to her emergencies, we're teaching her that there are no real consequences. were not helping her learn to handle life. I dismissed Dorothy's concerns, then convinced that providing for our daughter was simply what loving fathers did. Now, I understood that every financial rescue had actually been a lesson in manipulation. Every unconditional yes had been a withdrawal from an account that was now completely empty. The light turned green, and I made a decision that felt as mechanical and necessary as tightening a loose bolt. When I got home, I was going to call my daughter. Not to yell, not to accuse, but to inform her that the Harold Mitchell Bank was permanently closed for business. My phone sat in the cup holder, fully charged and ready. As I turned onto Elmwood Avenue, I could already envision the conversation. Marjorie would deploy every weapon in her emotional arsenal: tears, accusations, guilt trips about ungrateful fathers and family loyalty. She'd remind me of every proud moment, every achievement I'd funded, every reason I should continue being her personal ATM. But Fletcher's words echoed in my mind. She had the confidence of someone making a purchase she'd planned and saved for. $8,000 of my retirement money spent with the casual ease of someone buying groceries. I pulled into my driveway and sat for a moment, staring at the house where I'd raised her, where I'd taught her values that had apparently never taken root. The evening was approaching, and somewhere across town Marjorie was probably enjoying dinner with Theodore and his expensive new watch, completely unaware that her father had finally learned to read the manual she'd been writing for 20 years. Time to make that call. I sat in my kitchen with the same methodical calm I'd used to diagnose transmission problems for 30 years. The phone felt solid in my weathered hands as I scrolled to Marjorie's number, my pulse steady, despite the magnitude of what I was about to do. Through the window, the evening shadows stretched across Elmwood Avenue, like the long reach of 20 years of financial manipulation finally coming to light. The phone rang twice before her familiar voice answered, bright and casual, as if she'd never spent $8,000 of my retirement money on a luxury watch. "Hi, Dad. Perfect timing. Bradley and I were just talking about you. How was your day?" "Educational," I said, my voice level. "I learned quite a bit about watches today, specifically about Rolex Submariners and where people buy them in Rochester." The pause that followed was pregnant with recognition and fear. I could practically hear the gears turning in her head, calculating how much I knew and what damage control was needed. "Dad, I'm not sure what you're getting at, but Fletcher's fine jewelry on South Avenue," I interrupted, my tone still conversational but carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "March 15th, $8,200. Your signature on my credit card. Ring any bells?" Another pause, longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted into that honey-sweet register she'd perfected during her teenage years, when caught in lies about curfew violations and borrowed car privileges. "Daddy, I can explain. It's not what it looks like." Really, I leaned back in my chair, the same one where I'd sat for countless family dinners when she was young, back when I thought I was raising a daughter who shared Dorothy's values. "Because it looks like you lied to me about a medical emergency, took $8,000 from my retirement savings, and bought your father-in-law an expensive watch. Then you gave me $12 socks and acted like I should be grateful." "Dad, please just listen." "I am listening, Marjorie. I've been listening for 20 years. College emergencies, wedding expenses, student loan crises, and now medical bills that turned out to be jewelry purchases. I've heard it all." Her voice cracked slightly, and I recognized the sound, the same tremor that had convinced me to write check after check, believing I was helping my daughter through genuine hardships. "Theodore has done so much for our family, Dad. He deserves something special. I was going to tell you eventually, but I knew you wouldn't understand the importance. The importance of lying to your father." I stood up my chair, scraping against the kitchen floor, with the same finality I felt settling into my fasces. "Chest. The importance of stealing from the man who sold his fishing boat to pay for your college, who worked overtime for 6 months to afford your wedding. It's not stealing. You're my father. Family helps family. That's what you always taught me. I taught you that family helps family in times of genuine need. I didn't teach you that family lies to family to fund luxury gifts for other people." The silence stretched between us, filled with 20 years of misplaced trust and good intentions gone wrong. Finally, Marjorie spoke, her voice smaller, but still edged with that familiar manipulation. "So, what are you saying, Dad? You're going to punish me for one mistake." I looked at the kitchen where Dorothy had made countless meals, where we'd planned for a retirement that kept getting postponed because of Marjorie's emergencies, where I'd sat alone for 8 years, convinced that my sacrifices had raised a daughter who would honor the values we'd tried to instill. "I'm saying the bank is closed, Marjorie, permanently." The silence on the line stretched for nearly 15 seconds before Marjorie's voice returned, pitched higher now with a tremor I'd heard countless times before. It was the same tone she'd used at 16 when caught sneaking out at 20, when her credit card was declined at the mall at 25, when the wedding venue demanded full payment up front. Dad, you're really going to abandon your only daughter over money. After everything we've been through together, I recognized the pattern immediately. The same systematic approach I used to diagnose engine problems. First, she'd tried denial and deflection. When that failed, she'd moved to justification and rationalization. Now came phase 3, emotional manipulation disguised as wounded innocence. I'm not abandoning you over money, Marjorie. I'm protecting myself from being lied to and stolen from. There's a difference. Stolen from. Her voice cracked with practiced disbelief. Dad, I'm your daughter. Everything you have is supposed to be for me eventually anyway. You're acting like I robbed a stranger. The logic was so twisted it almost impressed me. In Marjorie's worldview, my retirement savings were simply her inheritance advanced without permission, but somehow still legitimate. It was the entitlement of someone who'd never had to choose between groceries and gasoline, never had to work overtime to afford Christmas presents. Your mother would be ashamed of what you've become, I said quietly. The words hit their target with surgical precision. Marjorie's sharp intake of breath carried across the phone line like a physical slap. I immediately regretted invoking Dorothy's memory as a weapon, but part of me, the part that had eaten peanut butter sandwiches for months to afford her wedding, wasn't sorry at all. How dare you? Her voice went ice cold, all pretense of vulnerability disappearing. Mom would understand that family takes care of family. She would never have been this selfish and cruel. Your mother tried to warn me about you during college. She said I was teaching you that consequences don't exist, that someone would always bail you out of trouble. I should have listened. This is unbelievable. You're rewriting history to justify being a terrible father. Mom loved me unconditionally. She never would have cut me off over one mistake. One mistake. I stood up again, pacing the small kitchen where Dorothy and I had planned our modest retirement, dreaming of weekend trips to the Finger Lakes and quiet evenings without financial stress. College tuition you manipulated me into paying. Wedding expenses you guilt-tripped me into covering. Student loans you claimed were crushing you. And now $8,000 for a fake medical emergency. That's not one mistake, Marjorie. That's a career. Her response came quickly, desperately. Fine, I'll pay you back. Every penny. I'll get a second job. I'll sell things, whatever it takes. Just please don't do this to me, Dad. Please don't give up on your daughter. The please hit exactly where it was supposed to, the same spot that had opened my wallet. For 20 years, the paternal soft tissue that couldn't bear to see his little girl in distress. But this time, I also heard something else beneath her desperation calculation. Even now, in full crisis mode, she was working an angle, planning her next approach. If you wanted to pay me back, you'd have offered before I found out about the watch, I said. You'd have told me the truth from the beginning. But you didn't because you never intended to pay me back. You intended to keep taking until there was nothing left. You're wrong about me, Dad. You're so wrong. Maybe, but I'm not wrong about closing the account. I walked to my kitchen drawer and pulled out the small notebook where I kept important phone numbers. The bank's customer service line was written in Dorothy's careful handwriting from years ago, back when we'd planned together for emergencies that never involved our daughter stealing from us. Dad, Dad, are you still there? Marjorie's voice carried a new edge of panic as the silence stretched. I'm here, I said, dialing the bank's number with my free hand. I'm calling to block your access to my credit card. Right now, while you're listening. You can't be serious. 24-hour customer service. One of the benefits of banking with First Federal for 37 years. The phone rang twice before a professional voice answered. I identified myself, provided my account information, and made my request, while Marjorie listened in stunned silence. Yes, I need to remove an authorized user immediately. Marjorie Thompson, my daughter, authorization code is Delta 779. Effective immediately. The customer service representative was efficient and courteous, confirming the action would take effect within the hour. When I hung up, Marjorie's breathing was audible across the connection, short, sharp inhalations of someone whose lifeline had just been severed. This is insane, Dad. You're going to regret this so much. We all will. Is that a threat, Marjorie? Her laugh was bitter, unrecognizable. It's not a threat. It's a fact. You think you can just cut me off and everything will be fine. You think there won't be consequences. What kind of consequences are we talking about? I kept my voice level, curious about how far she'd take this. In 30 years of fixing cars, I'd learned that when an engine starts making threatening noises, you pay attention to exactly what kind of threats it's making. Bradley's family has connections, Dad. Legal connections. Elder abuse is a serious accusation, and when a daughter has to make that kind of report about her own father, she let the implication hang in the air like exhaust fumes. Elder abuse, I repeated slowly, for protecting my own money from theft, for cutting off your daughter without cause, for abandoning family, for being cruel and vindictive instead of understanding and forgiving. The accusations stacked up like parts in a disassembled transmission, each one designed to make me doubt myself, to make me question whether I was being reasonable or heartless. But I'd spent too many years rebuilding broken engines to be intimidated by threats of legal action from the person who'd broken my trust. Marjorie let me be very clear about something. If you want to involve lawyers, you should know that I have documentation of every lie you've told me, every dollar you've taken under false pretenses. I have receipts, bank statements, and witnesses, so please, by all means, call your lawyer friends. The silence that followed felt like the moment after an engine finally seizes sudden, complete, and final. When she spoke again, her voice was small but venomous. I won't forget this, Dad. Neither will Bradley. And neither will anyone else in this family. There isn't anyone else in this family, Marjorie. Your mother is dead, and apparently so is the daughter she raised. I heard her sharp intake of breath, then nothing. The dial tone hummed in my ear like the sound of an engine that had finally been turned off after running rough for too long. I set the phone on the counter and looked around the kitchen where Dorothy and I had shared thousands of meals, where we'd planned for a retirement that kept getting postponed because of Marjorie's emergencies. For the first time in 8 years, the room felt peaceful. The Harold Mitchell Bank was officially closed for business. The morning sun cast long shadows across Rochester's downtown district as I walked into the law offices of Walsh & Associates, my folder of bank statements and documentation tucked under my arm like blueprints for a complex repair. Job. Sleep had come easier last night than it had in weeks, despite Marjorie's threats echoing in my memory. There's something liberating about finally standing up to a bully, even when that bully is your own daughter. Victoria Walsh's receptionist, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, directed me to a comfortable waiting area filled with leather chairs and legal journals. The office smelled of coffee and old books, professional but welcoming, a stark contrast to the cold marble of Fletcher's jewelry store. Here I didn't feel like an out-of-place mechanic. I felt like a client with legitimate concerns. Mr. Mitchell, a woman in her mid-40s, appeared in the doorway, her handshake firm and her smile genuine. Victoria Walsh looked exactly like someone you'd want in your corner during a legal fight, confident without being intimidating, professional without being cold. I understand you have some family financial concerns we need to discuss. Her office was organized chaos case files, stacked neatly legal books, marked with colorful tabs, and a coffee mug that read, "World's Okayest Lawyer," sitting next to her computer. She gestured to a chair across from her desk and poured herself coffee from a thermos. "Would you like some? It's stronger than what they serve in the waiting room. Please." I accepted the mug gratefully, surprised by the gesture. In 30 years of dealing with mechanics and parts suppliers, I'd learned to appreciate people who offered coffee without being asked. "So tell me what's been happening with your daughter." I spread my documentation across her desk, bank statements, credit card records, Fletcher's receipt screenshots of Facebook posts. As I walked through the timeline, Victoria took notes in neat handwriting, occasionally asking clarifying questions that showed she understood both the financial and emotional dimensions of what I'd experienced. "Mr. Mitchell, I want you to know that what you're describing is textbook financial exploitation. The fact that it's coming from a family member doesn't make it any less serious." Her words hit me with unexpected relief. For weeks I'd questioned whether I was overreacting, whether Marjorie's actions were somehow justified by family loyalty or paternal obligation. Having a legal professional validate my concerns felt like getting a second opinion from another mechanic who confirmed your diagnosis was correct. "She mentioned elder abuse accusations," I said, my voice steady despite the topic. "Threats about legal action if I don't restore her access to my accounts." Victoria's expression hardened slightly. "That's called intimidation, and it's exactly the kind of behavior we see from people who've been caught in financial exploitation. They turn the victim into the villain. If this story is touching your heart, a quick like would mean the world to me." "What are my options?" I asked, settling back in my chair with my coffee. The morning light streaming through her office windows felt warm and hopeful. "Several. First, we document everything you've told me today. Second, we make sure your financial accounts are completely secure. Third, we prepare for the possibility that she follows through on her threats." Victoria leaned forward, her tone becoming more serious. "Mr. Mitchell, I've handled cases like this before. Adult children who financially exploit their parents often escalate when their access is cut off. We need to be proactive, meaning we build a case that protects you before she tries to build one that hurts you. Victoria spread my documentation across her desk with the same methodical precision I'd used to organize parts for a complete engine rebuild. Bank statements, credit card records, Fletcher's receipts, screenshots of Marjorie's Facebook posts. Each piece of evidence found its place in what she called our protective portfolio. This is excellent documentation, Mr. Mitchell. Most clients come to me with fragments and memories. You've brought me a complete timeline with supporting evidence. 30 years of fixing problems taught me that you can't solve what you can't properly diagnose, I said, watching her sort through the papers. And you can't diagnose anything without all the facts organized properly. She smiled at the analogy. Exactly. Now let's build our 3-layer protection system. First, we secure your remaining assets. Second, we create an official record of the exploitation. Third, we prepare for any counteractions from your daughter. Victoria pulled out a legal pad and began sketching what looked like a flowchart. For asset protection, I'm recommending you establish a revocable trust. This puts a legal barrier between you and anyone trying to claim financial elder abuse while preserving your complete control over your money. How does that work? You become the trustee of your own trust. You have exactly the same access to your funds as before, but legally the trust owns the assets, not Harold Mitchell, the individual. If Marjorie tries to claim you're being financially abused by someone cutting off her access, we can demonstrate that your assets are professionally managed and protected. The logic reminded me of installing a security system in the garage. Same building, same tools, but with additional protection against unauthorized access. What about the bank accounts she already knows about? Victoria tapped her pen against the pad. We'll work with your bank to add additional security layers. A verbal password that only you know, mandatory callback verification for any changes, and a notation in your file about potential family member exploitation attempts. She picked up the phone and dialed. This is Victoria Walsh, representing Harold Mitchell, account holder at First Federal. We need to schedule an immediate security consultation for financial exploitation protection. While she arranged the bank meeting, I studied the evidence spread across her desk. Seeing it organized this way, chronological, documented, irrefutable, reminded me of laying out damaged engine parts to understand exactly how a failure had occurred. Marjorie's pattern of manipulation became as clear as a cracked piston or worn-out transmission. Bank meeting is set for tomorrow morning at 10, Victoria said, hanging up. They're bringing their fraud protection specialist. Now let's talk about documentation for potential legal proceedings. You mean if she actually tries to file elder abuse charges? When she tries, people who make threats like your daughter made usually follow through, especially when they realize their financial source is permanently cut off. Victoria's expression was serious but not alarming. We need to document your mental competency, your understanding of your financial decisions, and the voluntary nature of your actions. She handed me a business card. Dr. Sarah Chen, geriatric psychiatrist. She specializes in competency evaluations for exactly these kinds of cases. She'll interview you, document your decision-making process, and provide professional testimony if needed that you're acting as a fully competent adult protecting your own interests. A psychiatrist. Think of her as another diagnostic specialist, just like you'd consult a transmission expert for a complex automotive problem. She'll confirm what we both know, that you're a mentally competent adult making reasonable decisions to protect yourself from financial exploitation. Victoria gathered the papers into a neat stack. Mr. Mitchell, I've handled dozens of cases like yours. Adult children who exploit their parents financially often escalate their tactics when cut off. But with proper documentation and professional support, their threats usually collapse under scrutiny. For the first time since discovering that Facebook photo, I felt like I wasn't facing this problem alone. I was finishing my morning coffee when my phone buzzed with a text message that made my blood run cold. Dad, the police want to talk to you about elder financial abuse allegations. This didn't have to happen. Call me. The message was from Marjorie, sent at 6:47 a.m., calculated to catch me off guard, to make me panic and reach out to her for damage control. 2 days ago, it would have worked. Today, I forwarded the screenshot to Victoria and called her office. Harold, I've been expecting this. Victoria's voice was calm and reassuring when she answered. Marjorie filed a complaint yesterday afternoon. Monroe County Sheriff's Department called me an hour ago to schedule your interview. We're prepared for this. The relief that washed over me felt like the moment when a stubborn engine finally turns over after you've replaced the right part. Victoria's prediction had been accurate, her preparation had been thorough, and now her protection system was being tested under real conditions. What exactly is she claiming? Financial elder abuse, coercion, and diminished capacity. She's alleging that she's being vague about who has manipulated you into cutting off financial support to your family, and that you're not mentally competent to make these decisions independently. I almost laughed at the irony. After 20 years of Marjorie manipulating me into financial decisions that served her interests, she was now claiming I was being manipulated into decisions that served mine. When do we meet with the police? This afternoon at 2. Detective Reynolds is handling the case. I've worked with her before on family financial disputes. She's thorough but fair, and she understands the difference between legitimate elder protection and false accusations made by cut-off financial exploiters. Victoria's confidence was infectious. She'd seen this pattern before, handled cases like mine, knew exactly how these accusations typically unfolded and collapsed under scrutiny. Harold, I need you to understand something important. This complaint is actually good news for us. How is my daughter accusing me of being mentally incompetent? Good news because it forces her to prove her claims in a legal forum where evidence matters more than emotional manipulation. Everything we documented yesterday, your mental competency, your methodical decision-making process, your legitimate concerns about financial exploitation, becomes part of the official record. She was right. In filing this complaint, Marjorie had moved our conflict from the realm of family drama into the realm of legal procedure where Harold Mitchell, the systematic mechanic, had distinct advantages over Marjorie Thompson, the emotional manipulator. My phone buzzed again. Another text. Dad, please. I'm trying to protect you from people who are taking advantage of you. Just call me and we can fix this. I showed the message to Victoria when she arrived at my house an hour later, carrying a briefcase full of documentation and wearing the expression of an attorney who'd prepared thoroughly for exactly this scenario. Perfect, she said, reading Marjorie's text. She's establishing a pattern of attempting to contact you and influence your decisions even after you've clearly expressed your boundaries. This supports our position that she's the one attempting manipulation. We spent the next 2 hours reviewing my timeline, organizing evidence, and preparing for questions Detective Reynolds might ask. Victoria's preparation was meticulous. Every document cross-referenced, every potential question, anticipated every aspect of my mental competency and decision-making process documented with professional thoroughness. Remember, Victoria said as we prepared to leave for the sheriff's department, you're not the defendant in this situation. You're a competent adult who discovered financial exploitation and took reasonable steps to protect yourself. The complaint is Marjorie's attempt to regain access to your money, not a legitimate concern about your welfare. For the first time since receiving Marjorie's threatening text, I smiled. She'd thought she was cornering me. Instead, she'd walked into the trap we'd built together. The Monroe County Sheriff's Department interview room smelled of industrial coffee and fluorescent lighting, its beige walls and metal furniture designed for functionality rather than comfort. Detective Sarah Reynolds sat across from Victoria and me, a thick folder of documents spread between us like the components of a complex engine laid out for diagnosis. Detective Reynolds had the bearing of someone who'd spent years separating truth from manipulation, gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, shrewd eyes that missed nothing, and the patience of someone who'd heard every family, financial drama imaginable. She reminded me of the best part supervisors I'd worked under, thorough, fair, and impossible to fool. Mr. Mitchell, I've reviewed your daughter's complaint and the evidence Miss Walsh provided. Before we discuss the allegations, I want you to know that I've investigated dozens of elder financial abuse cases. I understand the difference between legitimate protection concerns and retaliatory complaints filed by family members who've been cut off from financial access. Her words carried the weight of professional experience, and I felt the same confidence I'd experienced when a master mechanic confirmed my diagnosis of a complex transmission problem. Your daughter claims you're being manipulated by outside parties into cutting off financial support to your family. She alleges diminished mental capacity and coercion. Can you walk me through your decision-making process? I organized my response the same way I'd organize tools for a difficult repair job, systematically, chronologically, with supporting evidence for each step. I told Detective Reynolds about the Facebook photo discovery, the jewelry store investigation, Fletcher's confirmation of the transaction, and Marjorie's lies about medical emergencies. This documentation is impressive, Detective Reynolds said, reviewing my bank statements and receipts. Most elder abuse victims don't maintain this level of detailed financial records. The timeline you've established contradicts your daughter's claims about sudden behavioral changes or outside manipulation. Victoria leaned forward. Detective, we also have Dr. Chen's competency evaluation, which was completed yesterday. Mr. Mitchell scored in the superior range for his age group on all cognitive assessments. And the pattern of financial requests over 20 years is well documented, I added, pulling out my notebook where I'd recorded every major financial emergency Marjorie had presented. College tuition, wedding expenses, student loan assistance, and now this fake medical crisis. Each time the story was designed to trigger my parental instincts while hiding the true purpose of the money. Detective Reynolds studied the evidence with the same methodical attention I'd seen crime scene investigators use on television, but this time I was the victim being vindicated rather than the suspect being interrogated. Mr. Mitchell, in your opinion, what was your daughter's motive for filing this complaint? To regain access to my credit card and bank accounts, I said without hesitation. When her standard emotional manipulation failed, she escalated to legal intimidation. She's hoping I'll restore her financial access to make this complaint go away. That's a common pattern we see in these retaliatory cases, Detective Reynolds confirmed. Adult children who've been financially exploiting elderly parents often file counter-complaints when their access is restricted, hoping to pressure the victim into backing down. Victoria nodded. Detective, we've also documented Miss Thompson's attempts to contact and influence Mr. Mitchell, even after he clearly established boundaries. Her text messages show a pattern of attempting to regain control rather than genuine concern for his welfare. Detective Reynolds closed the folder and looked at me directly. Mr. Mitchell, based on the evidence you've provided, and this interview, I'm closing this complaint as unfounded. You're clearly a competent adult who discovered financial exploitation and took reasonable steps to protect yourself. I'll be noting in my report that this appears to be a retaliatory filing by a family member whose financial access was legitimately restricted. For the first time in days, I felt like Harold Mitchell, the competent mechanic, rather than Harold Mitchell, the confused elderly man his daughter wanted everyone to believe I was. The drive back from the sheriff's department felt like returning from a successful diagnostic mission problem, identified solution, implemented results confirmed. Victoria sat beside me in the passenger seat, her briefcase full of vindication paperwork, while I processed the magnitude of what Detective Reynolds had officially confirmed I was a competent adult, protecting myself from financial exploitation, not a confused elderly man being manipulated by outside parties. Harold, there's one more decision we need to discuss, Victoria said as I pulled into my driveway. Now that the police complaint has been dismissed and your competency has been professionally validated, this might be the right time to consider will modifications. I turned off the engine and sat quietly for a moment, staring at the house where Dorothy and I had planned to grow old together, where I'd raised Marjorie with the hope that she'd carry forward our family values. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the front porch, where I'd taught her to ride a bicycle, where I'd taken countless photos on school picture days, where just last week I'd opened her insulting gift of discount socks. You're suggesting I cut her out completely. I'm suggesting you consider who you actually want to inherit the fruits of 40 years of hard work. The woman who lied to you about medical emergencies while spending your retirement money on luxury gifts for other people or organizations that will use your legacy to genuinely help people who need it. Victoria's directness reminded me of the best parts managers I'd worked with. No sugarcoating, no emotional manipulation, just practical assessment of available options based on documented evidence. What would that look like? We establish a charitable trust. You maintain complete control during your lifetime, but upon your death, your assets go to causes you actually care about. Veterans organizations, perhaps? Medical research. Local community programs? People who will honor your memory by using your money for legitimate purposes. I thought about the Veterans of Foreign Wars post, where I'd spent Saturday mornings for the past 5 years helping older veterans navigate VA benefits and Medicare complications. Men like me who'd worked their entire lives, saved carefully, and wanted their legacy to mean something beyond funding their children's expensive tastes. Dorothy always said she wanted our money to help people who truly needed it, I said, remembering conversations we'd had during her final months. She worried that giving Marjorie everything would just enable her worst tendencies rather than building her character. Your wife sounds like she understood the difference between helping and enabling. She did. I should have listened more carefully. Victoria pulled out her tablet and began outlining options. We can structure this several ways. A portion to veteran services, a portion to medical research in Dorothy's memory, perhaps something for community programs that help working-class families. Your legacy becomes about building up people who share your values rather than funding people who exploit them. The decision crystallized with the same clarity I'd experienced when diagnosing that first transmission problem 40 years ago. All the symptoms aligned, all the evidence pointed to the same conclusion, and the repair solution was obvious once you stopped letting emotional attachment cloud your mechanical judgment. "Let's do it," I said. "All of it. I want my money to go to people who will use it to help others, not to someone who sees me as a personal ATM." Victoria smiled. "Harold Mitchell, you just took back control of your entire legacy." As we walked toward my front door to begin the paperwork, I realized this was the first time in 8 years that I felt like Dorothy would be proud of a major decision I'd made. The notary's office occupied a modest suite in a downtown Rochester professional building, its atmosphere one of quiet dignity and legal formality. Margaret Chen, the notary public Victoria, had recommended possessed the methodical precision I'd come to appreciate in professionals who took their responsibilities seriously. Her office walls displayed certificates from the New York Secretary of State and 30 years of community service awards, credentials that suggested someone who understood the gravity of the documents people signed at her desk. "Mr. Mitchell," Margaret said, reviewing the will documents Victoria had prepared, "I want to ensure you understand the magnitude of these changes. You're removing your daughter as beneficiary and establishing a charitable trust structure. This decision is irreversible once these documents are properly executed." "I understand completely," I replied, my voice steady with the same confidence I'd felt when making complex diagnostic decisions in the garage. "I've had professional legal counsel, psychological evaluation, confirming my competency, and law enforcement validation of my decision-making process. This isn't an emotional reaction, it's a carefully considered choice based on documented evidence." Victoria spread the documents across Margaret's polished oak desk, like blueprints for a precision engine rebuild. The last will and testament of Harold Mitchell, the charitable trust agreement, the power of attorney modifications. Each document represented another mechanical component in a system designed to protect my legacy from further exploitation. "Miss Walsh has prepared excellent documentation," Margaret observed, reviewing each page with professional thoroughness. "Your mental competency evaluation from Dr. Chen is comprehensive, and the police department's dismissal of the elder abuse complaint provides additional validation of your decision-making capacity." The formal language felt appropriate for the magnitude of what I was doing. After 40 years of marriage and 20 years of single parenthood, I was officially severing the financial relationship between Harold Mitchell and the daughter he'd raised, educated and supported through countless emergencies that had turned out to be luxury purchases for other people. "Mr. Mitchell, please state for the record that you're signing these documents voluntarily, without coercion, and with full understanding of their contents." "I am signing these documents voluntarily," I said, clearly making eye contact with Margaret to ensure my competency was evident in the official record. "No one has coerced me into this decision. I understand that I'm removing my daughter, Marjorie Thompson, as beneficiary due to her pattern of financial exploitation, and I'm redirecting my estate to charitable organizations that will use my legacy to help people who genuinely need assistance." Margaret nodded and activated her notary seal. "Please sign and date each document where indicated." I signed my name with the same careful precision I'd used to sign important repair orders for 3 decades. Each signature felt like installing a component that would function long after I was gone, not to fund someone's expensive tastes, but to help veterans navigate bureaucracy, support medical research in Dorothy's memory, and assist working families facing genuine financial emergencies. "Mr. Mitchell," Margaret said, as she applied her official seal to each document, "these instruments are now legally binding. Your estate plan reflects your values and protects your legacy from future manipulation attempts." Victoria gathered the executed documents into her briefcase. "Harold, you've just ensured that your life's work will continue helping people after you're gone, rather than enabling someone who sees you as a source of funding." As we left Margaret's office, I felt a profound sense of completion. The same satisfaction I'd experienced after successfully rebuilding a complex transmission, knowing that every component was properly aligned and would function reliably for years to come. For the first time since Dorothy's death, I felt like the man she'd married, someone who protected what mattered and refused to be taken advantage of by anyone, including his own daughter. I was adjusting the carburetor on my old lawnmower Thursday afternoon when my phone rang with a number I didn't immediately recognize. The caller ID showed Theodore Hoffman, and my first instinct was to let it go to voicemail. I assumed Marjorie had convinced her father-in-law to intercede on her behalf to smooth over the misunderstanding about $8,000 of my retirement money. Harold, this is Theodore. I need to speak with you, man to man, about something very serious. His voice carried none of the jovial warmth I'd grown accustomed to at family gatherings. Instead, it held the controlled anger of someone who'd discovered an unpleasant truth about people he'd trusted. Theodore, if this is about Marjorie, it's about the watch, Harold. Your attorney contacted me yesterday with documentation about how it was purchased. I had no idea, none whatsoever. The words hit me like a wrench dropped on concrete. Victoria had reached out to Theodore without telling me a strategic move that demonstrated why she'd spent 30 years successfully navigating family legal disputes. I thought it was Marjorie's money. Theodore continued, his voice thick with embarrassment and anger. She told me she'd been saving for months to buy me something special that she wanted to thank me for helping with their house down payment last year. I never would have accepted an $8,000 gift from someone using her father's retirement money. I set down my tools and walked into the kitchen, needing the familiar comfort of Dorothy's space while processing this unexpected ally. She lied to both of us, Theodore. Worse than that. When your attorney showed me the bank statements and the timeline, I realized this wasn't just one lie. She's been systematically manipulating everyone around her, including my son. The conversation that followed felt like two mechanics, comparing notes on a complex engine failure, systematic analysis of how Marjorie had orchestrated her deception using each family member's trust and generosity against them. Bradley doesn't know about the medical emergency lie, Theodore said quietly. He thought she was using money you'd given her freely for family expenses. When I showed him the documentation your attorney provided, he was as shocked as I was. What did he say? That he'd married someone he didn't really know. That the woman he thought was responsible with money had actually been running financial scams on her own father. Theodore paused, and I could hear the weight of paternal disappointment in his silence. Harold, I raised Bradley, to be honest, to work for what he wants, to treat his elders with respect. Finding out that his wife has been exploiting you makes me question everything about their marriage. The alliance shift was as dramatic as any mechanical repair I'd ever witnessed. A complete reversal of family dynamics based on documented evidence rather than emotional manipulation. I'm driving over to your house this evening to return the watch personally, Theodore said. It belongs to you, and I owe you an apology for unknowingly participating in this scheme. You didn't know, Theodore. Marjorie is very skilled at making people believe what serves her purposes. Maybe, but I should have questioned why my daughter-in-law was making such extravagant gifts. In my generation, we were taught that if something seems too good to be true, it probably is. After hanging up, I returned to my lawnmower with a smile. Victoria's strategic thinking had accomplished something I never could have managed. Through direct confrontation, she'd turned Marjorie's strongest ally into her most informed opponent. The engine of family justice was finally running on all cylinders. Theodore's silver Cadillac pulled into my driveway at precisely 7 o'clock, the same punctuality he'd maintained throughout 30 years of running his construction business. He stepped out carrying a small jewelry box with the careful attention I'd once reserved for handling delicate engine components, his face bearing the serious expression of a man about to make an important repair to a damaged relationship. I met him on the front porch, the same spot where Dorothy and I had welcomed countless guests during happier family gatherings, before I'd learned that some family members saw hospitality as opportunity for exploitation. Harold, Theodore said, extending his hand with the firm grip of someone who'd spent decades earning respect through honest work. I owe you more than an apology. I owe you a complete account of how I was deceived and what I'm going to do about it. His directness reminded me of the best supervisors I'd worked under, men who took responsibility for problems in their shop, even when those problems originated with someone else's poor judgment. Theodore, you were manipulated just like I was. The only difference is she used my money to buy your goodwill. That's exactly why this is so serious. He opened the jewelry box, revealing the Rolex Submariner that had started this entire confrontation. Under my porch lights, the watch face gleamed with the same expensive luster that had mocked me in Marjorie's Facebook photo. This watch represents $8,000 of your retirement money stolen through lies about medical emergencies. I've been wearing evidence of theft on my wrist. I studied the watch that had caused such upheaval, but instead of anger, I felt a strange sense of completion. Like finding the missing bolt that explains why an engine wouldn't run properly. Holding this watch finally made the whole sequence of events make mechanical sense. Harold, I need you to understand something important. Theodore continued, his voice carrying the weight of paternal disappointment. I raised Bradley to respect his elders, to work for what he wants, and to be honest in all his dealings. Finding out that his wife has been systematically exploiting her own father goes against everything I taught him about family responsibility. What does Bradley say about all this? He's devastated. He thought he'd married a responsible woman who was close to her family. Instead, he's discovered he's married to someone who's been running financial scams on the man who paid for her education, her wedding, and every emergency she could manufacture. Theodore closed the jewelry box and handed it to me with ceremonial formality. This belongs to you, Harold, not because you want an expensive watch, but because it represents justice. Your money stolen through deception has been returned to its rightful owner. The weight of the box felt significant beyond its physical mass. It represented vindication, proof that truth eventually surfaces, even when buried under layers of manipulation and family loyalty. There's something else, Theodore said. Bradley and I have discussed this situation extensively, and we've decided to cut off all financial support to Marjorie and her household. No more house payment assistance, no more emergency loans, no more bailouts of any kind. If she wants to steal from family members, she'll have to find new victims. As Theodore walked back to his Cadillac, I stood on my porch, holding $8,000 worth of evidence that sometimes the most important repairs involve fixing relationships rather than engines. The evening air carried the scent of Dorothy's azaleas, and for the first time since her death, I felt like the man she'd married was fully present on this porch, protective, principled, and nobody's fool. The knock on my front door came at 8 o'clock on a Saturday morning, interrupting my peaceful routine of coffee and newspaper reading that I'd established since cutting Marjorie out of my financial life. Through the window, I could see her standing on my porch with Bradley, both looking like they'd spent the night rehearsing their approach for this final attempt to breach the boundaries I'd built. Marjorie's appearance shocked me. Her usually pristine hair was unkempt, her designer clothes replaced by wrinkled, casual wear, and her face bore the desperate expression of someone whose carefully constructed financial strategy had completely collapsed. Bradley stood behind her like a reluctant accomplice, his posture suggesting he'd been dragged along against his better judgment. I opened the door, but remained in the doorway, my body language, making it clear that this was not an invitation into my home. "Dad, please, we need to talk," Marjorie began, her voice carrying the same manipulative sweetness that had convinced me to write countless checks over the years. "I know you're angry, but we can work this out. We're family. Family doesn't lie to each other about medical emergencies to fund luxury purchases," I replied, my tone as level as when I'd explained transmission problems to customers who didn't want to hear the diagnosis. Bradley shifted uncomfortably. "Harold, look, we know mistakes were made. We're here to make it right. What exactly are you offering to make right?" I crossed my arms, studying them with the same analytical attention I'd once given to suspicious engine noises. The $8,000 stolen through lies, the 20 years of manufactured emergencies, the police complaint filed to intimidate me into backing down. Marjorie's facade began cracking. "Dad, you're being impossible. Theodore told us he gave you back the watch. Fine, you made your point. Now can we please move past this and get back to normal? Normal." I repeated the word like I was tasting something bitter. Normal was me emptying my retirement account every time you manufactured a crisis. Normal was you seeing me as an ATM instead of a father. Normal was you filing false elder abuse charges when I finally said no. "Those charges were dismissed," Bradley said quickly, as if that fact erased the attempt to destroy my reputation and independence. "Because I had documentation, legal representation, and professional testimony proving my competency," I replied. "Not because you developed a conscience." Marjorie's desperation became more apparent as her voice rose. "Dad, what do you want from us?" We apologized. "We're here trying to fix this. Isn't that enough?" I studied my daughter, this woman who'd systematically exploited my love for 20 years, who'd lied about life-threatening emergencies to fund her lifestyle, who'd tried to have me declared mentally incompetent when her financial access was cut off. The man I'd been 8 months ago would have been moved by her tears, would have interpreted her presence on my porch as genuine remorse rather than strategic desperation. "Marjorie, you're not here because you're sorry. You're here because Theodore cut off your house payments, because your credit cards are maxed out, and because you need another financial rescue. The only thing you regret is getting caught." Her mask slipped completely. "Fine. Yes, we need help. That's what families do. They help each other through difficult times. Families help each other through genuine emergencies," I said, my voice carrying the finality of an engine that had seized beyond repair. They don't manufacture fake crises to steal retirement money for luxury watches. I stepped back and placed my hand on the door handle. This conversation is over. Dad, please. Goodbye, Marjorie. I closed the door with the same decisive action I had used to complete thousands of successful repairs, knowing that some problems couldn't be fixed. They could only be permanently disconnected from the systems they were damaging. The silence that followed the closing of my front door felt different from any quiet I'd experienced in the 8 years since Dorothy's death. This wasn't the empty silence of loss or the anxious silence of waiting for the next financial emergency call from Marjorie. This was the satisfied silence of a complex repair job completed successfully, every component properly aligned and functioning as intended. I walked back to my kitchen table where my coffee had grown cold during the confrontation, but instead of reheating it, I simply sat and absorbed the magnitude of what had just occurred. For the first time in 20 years, I had refused to be manipulated by my own daughter. The man who had emptied his retirement account for college emergencies and wedding expenses and fake medical crises had finally learned to say no with the finality of a properly tightened bolt. Through my kitchen window, I could see Marjorie and Bradley walking slowly back to their car, their body language conveying the defeat of people whose last strategy had failed completely. There was no satisfaction in watching their retreat, only the quiet resolution of someone who had protected his boundaries against a threat he'd finally learned to recognize. My phone sat silent on the counter, no longer a weapon of financial manipulation, but simply a communication device that I controlled. The credit cards that had once funded Marjorie's deceptions were secured in my name only. The bank accounts that had hemorrhaged money for manufactured emergencies were protected by passwords and security questions she'd never learn. Most importantly, the will that had once guaranteed her inheritance now directed my legacy toward people who would use it to help others, rather than fund their own expensive tastes. I picked up the jewelry box containing the Rolex that Theodore had returned, $8,000 of evidence that truth eventually surfaces, even when buried under layers of lies and family loyalty. The watch face gleamed under my kitchen lights, no longer a symbol of betrayal but a reminder that systematic investigation and professional support could triumph over even the most sophisticated manipulation. The transformation felt as complete as any engine rebuild I'd ever accomplished. The Harold Mitchell, who had signed blank checks without question, had been completely overhauled and replaced with a version who required documentation, maintained boundaries, and refused to enable destructive behavior, regardless of its source. The new model ran smoother, more efficiently, and with significantly better protection against future exploitation attempts. Dorothy's presence felt stronger in the kitchen than it had since her funeral. I could almost hear her approval in the quiet morning air, her relief that I'd finally become the man she'd always known. I could be someone who protected what mattered and refused to be taken advantage of by anyone, including his own daughter. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 9 times, marking not just the hour, but the end of a chapter that had defined my life for too long. Somewhere in Rochester, Marjorie was probably planning her next approach, calculating whether different tactics might succeed, where tears and threats had failed. But for the first time since Dorothy's death, I felt immune to whatever strategy she might deploy. I had learned to distinguish between genuine emergencies and manufactured crises, between family loyalty and family exploitation, between helping and enabling. Most importantly, I had learned that love doesn't require funding, and that the most important repairs sometimes involve disconnecting damaged components that compromise the entire system. The engine of my life was finally running on all cylinders again. 6 months later, I stood on the same porch where I'd closed the door on Marjorie's manipulation, but this Memorial Day felt like a celebration rather than an endurance test. The morning air carried the scent of Dorothy's azaleas in full bloom, and instead of dreading family obligations, I was preparing to host the most meaningful gathering my home had seen since my wife's funeral. Victoria arrived first, carrying a covered dish and wearing the comfortable smile of someone who'd become much more than my attorney. Our relationship had developed with the same methodical care I'd once applied to complex engine repairs. No rushed decisions, no dramatic declarations, just the steady appreciation of two people who'd learned to value honesty and shared principles above convenience and emotional manipulation. The veterans from the shelter should be here soon, she said, adjusting the flowers she'd brought for Dorothy's memory corner. They're very excited about meeting the man whose watch money helped them get back on their feet. Through my kitchen window, I could see cars pulling into my driveway. Danny from next door with his wife, Eleanor. 3 veterans from the downtown shelter where my Rolex money had funded a job, training program, and Margaret Chen, the notary, who'd helped me reclaim my legal independence. These were people who appreciated genuine hospitality rather than seeing it as an opportunity for exploitation. Frank, a Vietnam veteran in his 70s, shook my hand with the firm grip of someone who understood the value of work and dignity. Harold, that job training program you funded got me certified as a security guard. First steady income I've had in 3 years. That's what the money was supposed to do, I replied, feeling the satisfaction of an investment that had actually helped someone, rather than funding luxury purchases for people who already had everything they needed. The afternoon unfolded with the easy rhythm of people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. We shared stories on the porch, grilled hamburgers on the deck. Dorothy and I had built together and raised toasts to the veterans who'd served our country with the same sense of duty and sacrifice that had once characterized my relationship with my daughter. As the sun began setting over Rochester, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, I realized this was the Memorial Day. Dorothy would have wanted a celebration of service, sacrifice, and community, rather than an obligation to fund someone else's expensive lifestyle. Victoria squeezed my hand as we watched our guests enjoying themselves in the backyard. You've built something beautiful here, Harold, a real family based on choice and mutual respect rather than manipulation and financial obligation. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.